We're going to cover something that the prophets have actually talked about the church being prepared to do now for a number of years. As a matter of fact, it may come on us sooner than any of us would realize this morning. Brother Dyer told me on one occasion, he said, Brother Skousen, do you realize how close we are to coming into the period when we live the law of consecration? And I said, well, I had assumed it would be a long time. He said, you know, the brethren at any time may call some small special groups to start living the law of consecration. I said, that's fascinating. He said, the preliminaries have already been done. He said, it won't be done till the Lord approves it, but he said, I don't think it's very far away myself. That was a number of years ago. Anyway, I became intensely interested in the mechanics of the law of consecration and found out that it was about 180 degrees opposite from what most of the members of the church have grown up believing it is. It was an exciting investigation, sort of a scriptural detective assignment. And this morning I just want to share with you a few highlights because you'll go home much better educated on something that we ourselves are going to have to do one of these times as a result of the experience that we're going to have today. Let me say just first of all that for several thousand years there have been community planners who wondered how they could set it up so you wouldn't have to worry about your security. Wouldn't it be just nice to work at the thing you enjoy doing the best and forget about doctors and bank accounts and insecurity, unemployment, just live a happy life without the worry of all those things that we ordinarily associate with our welfare, our personal welfare. In other words, we wouldn't have to worry about property, we wouldn't have to accumulate any property, we wouldn't have to worry about a house to live in or transportation, medicine, all those things that we spend so much time and money on would be devoted to productive labor and creative activities. Wouldn't that be nice? All right, some of the finest minds that have graced this earth have tried to come up with a formula. One of the very first to put it together in a codified form was Plato. And Plato said, I think private property is responsible for the evil of selfishness in the world. I think it's responsible for crime. I think it's responsible for war. The whole idea of private property, he said, I think it ought to be abandoned. And he said, I think we ought to go for a society where everything belongs to everybody, except, your own personal things like your clothes and few books, things like that. But you wouldn't have any private jewelry, you wouldn't have any private savings account, you wouldn't have a private home, you wouldn't have a private chariot or car, whatever. In fact, he was opposed to having a private wife. I mean, he said, I think all the women ought to belong to all the men belong to all the women, and I think that the government ought to raise the kids. This is called the Republic, which it is not. His book called The Republic is not a republic. It's the idea of a communal society, operated under the direction of a group that call themselves the philosopher kings, which means dictators. It would be a dictatorship with everybody enjoying the good life under their supervision. There would be no laws. He said we just do things by wisdom, not by laws. He said laws are crutches for people that are sort of dim-wits. But if you have the people that are dim-wits to rule you, why then you better have a system of laws, so I'll write a system of laws, being a very wise man myself. And so he wrote two books, one The Republic and the other The Laws. Now in it he said something most insightful. He said you must get accustomed to the fact that communal living is not efficient. It is not productive. And it will only work so long as the women don't want soft sofas and soft beds, tapestries and carpets. Just the moment that anybody wants anything nice, the system will break down. It's got to be a very simple, rustic life. And Rousseau thought this would be great, where everybody lives in his little cottage and and with the thatched roof and so forth. And then we go back to a primitive society. He thought that was the road to happiness. Plato said we're going to have to kind of ease into this thing, so I'm only going to have the perfect communal living on the top level with the philosopher kings. Underneath them, we'll have the soldiers who will keep the philosopher kings in power so that the rabble mob doesn't overthrow them. And then we'll just have the crowd, the workers down underneath. And we'll stratify everybody into those three classes, just like they've done in the Soviet Union and just like they've done over in China. There's no equality, not designed to be. Well, that's what grew out of Plato. And many of the terrible blunders and errors, the genocide, the destructions of millions of human beings have, in our day and time, have been done in the name of Plato. See, a lot of our people don't recognize that. When they come along and say we got to get the children away from the parents, we got to have these little schools where the children take care of all day long and so forth, these little centers, that's all Plato. When you come along and say, let's have unisex, let's not worry about family anymore. If your couple wants to live together, fine. If they decide it's not pleasant anymore, separate. That's all Plato. He structured that very carefully. Now, a lot of people don't realize that, but anyone who's gone through college in philosophy has had this. And you have most of your leaders today believers in the Platonic philosophy of the ideal society. All right, now with that as background, let me just remind you of something that happened now about 1800. These societies had not worked for anybody. They didn't work for Plato. They've been tried since. Sometimes a few monks could make them work as long as they were subsidized by people that were making contributions. But in 1800, there were three men who thought they had come up with it. And one was Fourier, and one was Saint-Simon, or Saint Simon, it's spelled, and the other was Robert Owen. Now those three men all structured these little societies where people who wanted to, voluntarily, the government had nothing to do with it, they would give up everything, pool their property, and come together and live in what they thought might be an ideal society. Now none of them worked. The Amish people made theirs last the longest, but even they have given up now and gone back to private property and competitive free enterprise just to survive. I mean, it just kept winding down. The Hutterites up in Canada, I visited with them, and they're on the tail end of dying. And I talked to one of the leaders there outside of Raymond in one of their little colonies, and it was kind of interesting to catch his point of view. Because they had about 59 people. They keep them in small groups. Beautiful farm equipment. I want to tell you, they had the finest hog farm you ever saw. Beautiful chicken farm. And they were farming, I think, about 15,000 acres. And they were living in houses. They had about 5 houses for the 59 people. And they ate at a common table. Nobody owned anything. And I thought, maybe the Hutterites finally, they did it. I talked to the leader. And I said, how's this working out? Well, he said, if it weren't for our religion, we'd give it up. And I said, well, it looks like you're prospering to me. He said, come over here to the fence. Let me show you something. And I went over to the fence. He said, see those 2 beautiful homes over there? I said, yes. He said, see all those automobiles around there? I said, yes. He said, they're farming 15,000 acres. And it's only 2 families. They work about 4 months out of the year, and the rest of the time they go on world tours and travel. Their children are able to go to college. All of them have automobiles. They're prospering. Here, we are making it, but none of us own anything. We have 2 cars for 59 people. Our children are all leaving. We never allow our women to buy anything. So when they go into the stores in Raymond, they're followed around by one of the managers because they steal. Our children steal. Our women steal. They steal jewelry. And they know that it's in violation of our religion. Our young people are all leaving us. Just a question of time. I don't know what's going to happen to us. We're 400 years old, but in this modern society, it's fading. Now this is all important to us historically, because when the gospel was first restored and the church was established in 1830, Joseph Smith went to Kirtland, Ohio, and one of the St. Simon or Owenite communals had been set up under the Campbellite church at Thompson. And they had a farm, and they were all living together. They all joined the church. They asked Joseph Smith, "Shall we continue our communal life?" He said, I don't know. I guess so. I guess it's all right. And then he watched these people. A fellow would walk up to a Sunday morning and say, "Hey, I want that tie." And he'd jerk a tie off the fellow and put it on me. "That matches my suit better." And somebody was grabbing another man's coat. And there was just the most terrible confusion and competition over property. And the prophet, they'd all joined the church, and well, he just didn't know. But it didn't seem very Christian. At least it wasn't conducive to a very good spirit among them. So he decided to present it to the Lord. And it was very interesting what the Lord said. He said, "Tell them to stop this immediately and get ready to move to Missouri, and I will there show them my more perfect order of Enoch," the Law of Consecration. Now, if you want to get the basic substance of the order of Enoch, it's in the 42nd section of the Doctrine and Covenants. And most of the Doctrine and Covenants, or that section, Doctrine and Covenants, is spent on how to live a decent life. Don't steal, don't cheat, don't lie, don't commit the common offenses that seem to go along with human nature. That's what the section keeps saying. And then finally it says, and now here's what you do. You come to the bishop when you've established the law of consecration, and you consecrate everything that you own to the bishop. The bishop then will assign you your stewardship. You will then make it as profitable as you can, and when the year is over or the harvest is in, because it was an agriculture society, it'd be the same thing with industry, you turn in everything to the central royal treasury except that which is necessary for comfortable living or necessary for your project. The bishop's stewardship is to see that everything is properly allocated and everyone is adequately taken care of. And the Lord says that each one will be given his assignment and his property in fee simple. He will own it. There will be private property. There will be competition. And everybody tries to make the most profit possible in order to turn in more to the common fund. You have no insurance to pay for, you have no savings account, and your children get their stewardships as they grow up. So you don't have to worry about them either. You would, but I mean, you know they're going to be taken care of. How do you like that? It was spelled out in more detail by the prophet Joseph in the history of the church. And I just want to give you an example of first a prosperous order of Enoch and then a poor order of Enoch, and show you how the thing would work. Let's say that I'm a school teacher and I have a family of 8. I have a good car and a job. And I have 20 acres. Always had a hankering to farm. It gives me hay fever, but I always had a hankering to farm. And I don't actually farm the darn thing. I keep my saddle horses out there. I love to ride horses. And I come to the bishop and I say, "Bishop, you know, I've been watching this law of consecration here, and I think my wife and I and my family could live it now." Well, all right, I've been kind of watching you. I wondered if maybe one of these days you'd come in and say you wanted to live in it. Have you got everything deeded over now to the order? And I said, "Yes, everything I own, I've got it here." And the prophet Joseph said, what you do is to deed everything over to the order, then put it on the table and put your hand on it. And say, "Now, Bishop, what did you have in mind for me?" All right, now here's the proposition he makes to me. He said, I want you to continue teaching school, Brother Skousen. I want that to be your stewardship. You're going to need your family car, and you travel quite a bit back and forth, and so you'll need the jalopy too. So I want you to keep that too. And then certainly I'm going to deed back to you your home. But it's all sacred property now, remember. You don't, this property from here on is God's property. It's not the order's property. It's really God's property. It's consecrated property. Just kind of keep that in mind. And it's to be made a stewardship, to be as profitable. Your home is to produce wonderful LDS children, and your school teaching is to promote the gospel. Everything now that you have in your power is consecrated to God. Now that 20 acres, I'd like to keep that if you don't mind, Brother Skousen. I'll tell you why. I got a boy just graduating. He and his young bride are just graduating from the State College of Agriculture. He comes from a farm family. He knows what it means to get up at 4 a.m. in the morning. And I've got another 20 acres right next to yours. Now, he can't make it on 20 acres, but on 40, I think he can. Now, I thought I'd take your 20 acres and the other 20 I've got, and I'd give it to him and his bride. And I said, well, Bishop, what's he contributing? Well, he said, he's just out of school. He doesn't contribute anything. And you're going to give him my 20 acres? Yes, I deed it over to him. It would be his property. Well, where would I ride my horses? Well, he said, I ride them like you've always ridden them. I think we could arrange with him to let you keep your horses out there. I mean, we could work out something probably. You'd have the benefit of the horses, and he'd have the benefit of making that land productive. Well, yeah, I haven't had a chance to farm it, but I thought maybe my stewardship would be a nice big farm. I could farm instead of teach school. Well, maybe later, Brother Skousen, but right now we need school teachers. So if you don't mind, this is going to be your assignment. Now, that's the way I'd like to set it up. How do you feel about that? And I said, well, let me talk it over with my wife. And 20 acres, man, well, we sacrificed to pay for those 20 acres. Pretty soon we come back and said, well, if we're going to do it, we're going to do it. So we go, as they say, all hog kosher style. And we turn it over to him. Now I go along about my business and I ride my horses. Real nice young fellow. Gee, I like him. Boy, he works like a beaver, man. He really put that 40 acres into shape. I was surprised that my 20 acres could produce so much. Man, he got up there about 100 bushels on an acre. I mean, he really had that thing going. And he had some of it in alfalfa, and man, he got 3 cuttings off it, 3 full cuttings. I wondered why I hadn't been doing that. Anyway, do you know what I found the bishop doing the very next season? That bishop turned over another 200 acres to him. And he took some of the young fellows that didn't know how to farm but wanted to farm, and he assigned them to work for him at wages as their stewardship. Darndest thing I ever saw. And the next thing I knew, he had given that kid a section of land. I wondered if he's going to give me back my 20 acres, but he didn't. And he just kept stacking on that boy and stacking on that boy more land. And I thought, I wonder if they're relatives or something, you know. I talked to my wife about it, and no, they weren't relatives or anything. But do you know, about the 3rd Christmas, the bishop called the council together that was in charge of distribution and so forth, and said, brothers and sisters, the council has met, and we've decided to declare a dividend. All our debts are paid off, and we have a very fine fund for our young people and for our medical expenses, and we're pretty secure in that respect. And we think we just give everybody a dividend. And so, Brother Skousen, you'll please come up and get yours. And he hands it to me, and my God, I can't believe it. I got a couple of $1,000 here. I'm used to giving everything into the order, and all of a sudden the order gives me something back. And afterwards I said, hey, Bishop, what's this for? I mean, well, he said it's to do anything. Have you ever wanted a nice library of books, Brother Scott? Oh, man, I just drool when I go down to the bookstore. Well, do it. Ever want to go to the Holy Land? Yeah, I sort of did. Do it. Do it. Man, you mean I can spend this any way I want to? Yes. So somebody built nice fences around their places, or put fancier roofs on or something, or did whatever they wanted to do, fixed up their places, or did what they wanted to do with that little dividend. So we went on about our business, and I said to the bishop, I got amazed that this is working out so well. How are you able to do this? Tell me about it. I think you're the greatest bishop I ever heard of. How did you manage this? Well, he said, you remember that 20 acres you gave me? Yeah, I'll never forget it. He said, I knew that in that boy I had a good farmer. And I just been giving him a lot of land. Have you noticed that? I said, yeah, I really have noticed it. I discussed it with my wife a little bit about how much you're up to 5,000 acres on that boy. Yeah, and he said he doesn't want any more. He said he's got nearly 100 young men working for him, and he thinks that's about as much as he can handle. He's just working day and night. You notice he just worked himself to a frazzle almost. Yeah, he really does work. Well, that's why we got that good dividend mostly, because he has really been turning in a lot of surplus. Well, Bishop, that's great, isn't it? He said, I think so. He said, you notice he just lives like the rest of us. I mean, he's making enough money for this organization. He could live in a mansion, drive Cadillacs and so forth. Hey, that's interesting, Bishop. And Sunday, you know what? I walk up to that young man and, how are you doing? Man, you are really doing a great job. Well, he said, I'm trying. I said, you're not only trying, you're succeeding. Boy, you're just great. Well, thanks, Brother Skousen. You never mentioned that to me before. I'm glad we have a better relationship. I always thought you kind of resented that 20 acres, and I want to tell you, if I hadn't have been for that, I never would have made it. Well, we got to give you you knew what to do with it, and so forth, etc. We have a real good relationship. You see what his reward is? It's the same reward that a bishop has, who's running deacons, 100% attendance Sunday morning. Priests, almost 100% of them going on a mission. Home teaching, 98% every month. Home. See the satisfaction of a bishop? That's a stewardship. And here's a young fellow working day and night, working hard. I'm working hard. But he's making a lot more money than I am. I'm just teaching the kids. But he's actually producing harvest and pouring it into the central treasury, and we're becoming a rich order of Enoch. Okay? All right, now let me very quickly give you the opposite. Let's say that I'm that young man, and I am allowed under this order to hold back whatever I think is needful for my living and the project that I'm involved in. And that's part of the program. Everything else I turn in. But I got 5,000 acres and it's producing an awful lot, and man, my wife's worked awfully hard with me side by side, and we've been at this thing now for about 10 years, and I decide this year I'm going to hold back just a little more. So I hold back enough for a new roof. We don't need a new roof, actually, but I've always wanted a slate roof. A nice slate roof. Expensive as a dickens, but I've always kind of, after all, we work hard. And I've always wanted one of those lovely iron fences, painted white, I always thought that'd be nice. They turned out to be kind of expensive, but after all, that the Lord himself said that we should each receive according to our wants. And I want to satisfy a few wants. And my sweet wife, man, she's worked so hard. She never had a fur coat in her whole life. I'm going to hold back enough for a fur coat. And I feel good about that. And I'm going to turn the rest into the bishop. And I do. And the bishop calls and he says, Brother Skousen, can I take you on a little automobile ride with me? Yeah, Bishop, where do you want to go? Well, I want to go down to River Bottom. My gosh, what do you want to go down there for? Well, Do you remember Lucille Jones? Oh, hey, that's my old grade school teacher. Oh, yeah. In fact, she taught me right up through the grades and into high school. Man, I loved Sister Jones. I'll tell you, there was a great soul. That's one of the best teachers I ever had. Well, he said, she's not feeling too good. I just wonder if you'd mind going down and visiting her with me. Well, yes. I haven't seen her for a long time, Bishop. Yeah, I'd love to go. So we go down the river bottom. Man, I haven't been down that neighborhood for so long, and I know it's kind of run-down neighborhood area. And I get down there, and all of a sudden we stop in front of a place, and I can't believe it. I said, what are we stopping here for? He said, this is the home of Lucille Jones. You mean our Sister Jones is living here? Yeah, he said, this is where she's always lived. For years she's lived here. Man, I look at that fence. Cows could go in and out of that thing at will. Gates hanging on one hinge. I don't say much more. I just follow the bishop. I'm in a state of shock. We go up to the screen door. The screen is all rotted out. And, man, it looks like it needs a new roof. This place is dilapidated. It needs painting. So Sister Jones comes to the door and said, oh, Bishop, come in. She didn't even see me. And so he goes in, and she's obviously suffering from severe arthritis and in very great pain. And she said, sit down. And Bishop says, and here's Brother Skousen. Do you remember Brother? Oh, Cleon, how are you? And she gives me a big hug, and while she has her arms around me, I notice over on the chair her old plaid coat. Well, I think she wore that coat ever since I knew her in grade school. And she's still wearing her old plaid coat, and there it is. And but what bothers me more, the linoleum is even worn out on the floor. And it looks like the plaster is going to start falling. That roof is leaking up there. And I sit there and for heaven's sakes, what's this stupid bishop doing? What kind of a bishop have we got anyway that would let a woman that has paid her tithing and served the people, been a Relief Society president, live in a hovel like this? So we visit with her a while, and pretty soon we leave, and I can hardly wait to get in the car. Boy, I'm ready to roast the bishop. And as we drive out, I say, Bishop, I think that is a disgrace to our order. For us to have a woman of that integrity and that much service living in these kind of conditions is a disgrace. And I really meant to him. The rest of us been working hard, and what's he doing with all this we're turning into him? Now he said, Brother Skousen, I think it's a disgrace too. He said, I don't know whether you realize what a difficult time I'm having, but I have 80 widows just like Sister Jones. And I'm keeping them in food, and that's about all. I can't even paint their houses. I can't mend their fences. And I thought there that some of you brethren that have been prospering, is there any possibility you might be able to contribute a little more? Man. All of a sudden, that bishop has touched me. You see, he can't come around and tell me that I've got to turn in this much surplus wheat or this much of anything. It's between me and the Lord. I'm on a stewardship principle. I own my own property. Everything he gave me, all 5,000 acres. I didn't buy an acre of it. He gave it to me as a stewardship. And when he gave it to me, I got it in fee simple, and I own it. And I've been farming it hard and turning in the surplus. But oh man, I had enough. I held back enough for an iron fence, and that would build a dozen widows decent fences, modest fences. I held enough back for our slate roof that would probably roof a dozen widows' homes. And what I held back for my wife's fur coat, man, what that wouldn't buy in nice coats, comfortable, adequate coats for a dozen widows. I said, Bishop, I apologize. Then I tell him what I did. And then I say, Bishop, here's how much more I can give you. So there are the two ways that the order works. You saw how it worked so that they all prosper. Another one that isn't having too easy a time of it, that bishop has to depend upon reaching the hearts of each member of the order in order to make it function. Everybody follow that? It's all voluntary. Now, supposing I got cross with the bishop and I decided to leave. What about those 5,000 acres? Can I leave the United Order, or no, this isn't the United Order, this is the Law of Consecration according to Eni. Can I leave it and take my 5,000 acres with me? Can I or can I? Isn't this interesting? It's mine. Now, it is consecrated property. I can never take it out from under consecration. I'm going to be responsible to God from here on for what happens to that property. I can never violate that covenant without very severe punishment. But the bishop cannot prevent me from taking it. How could he prevent it? I have the legal rights to it. Now, when the law of consecration was set up down in Missouri, the bishops couldn't reconcile themselves to let the property go. So they leased it. they kept a lease on it. Now here's what happens when a bishop keeps control of property and looks upon it as his property. He comes around and says, now, Brother Skousen, I've been a farmer all my life too, and you should have plowed 3 weeks ago. You're late. I said, now, Bishop, you plow your farm and I'll plow mine. Because all you'd get if my particular farm has the kind of soil that if I would be trying to harrow and disc those clods into some kind of workable soil from here to late spring if I plowed now. It's too wet. I've got to wait till it dries out a little more on that particular. I know what I'm doing. You just judge me by the harvest at the end of the season. Don't tell me how to run my farm. See the difference? Now, the presiding bishop in Missouri wouldn't do that. He would not give the property to the people. And so Joseph Smith wrote a letter to him on instructions from the Lord and said to that bishop, if you don't assign the stewardships according to the law of the Lord is going to send down one mighty and strong to set the inheritances up correctly. And that meant the president of the church. Meant Joseph Smith. If you do not operate this correctly, you may lose the whole thing. And that's just exactly what happened. We were driven out of Missouri, and part of it was because those bishops wouldn't run the law of consecration right. Now, we're going to do it again one of these times, but I just wanted to mention one final thing, and that's called the United Order. We sometimes confuse the two. The law of consecration is each community setting up an order and functioning as I've described it. Then each community usually has a surplus that it wants to exchange with other people. Idaho is just burdened with potatoes. And they are so hungry for oranges and grapefruit. Now, the great central exchange is the United Order. Everybody follow that? All of this was in the welfare manual of 20 years ago, 15 years ago, whenever it was. Oh no, it's 30 years ago. I can't believe it. Anyway, long time ago, all of this was explained to the priesthood. It's all been forgotten. You can ask one out of any 1,000 members of the priesthood how the program is supposed to work. Nobody knows anymore. Not even bishops know how it works anymore. We've stopped studying it. We don't know how the original program was. And a lot of people will see communism and say, well, I guess that's what the Lord will have under the United Order when it's under the priesthood instead of under the communist dictators. They don't realize that one is the devil's workshop and the other is the Lord's workshop. And they don't have anything in common. All the basic principles are just the opposite. And that's important to understand. Now, today you're going to see one of the most perfect communal operations that exists in all Israel. It's independent. It is not subsidized by the government. It has a plastic factory. It has 250,000 chickens. It has, not that many chickens quite. It has 250 cows, 40,000 chickens. It has groves. It has orchards. It has fields. It has flocks. And it's a big one. And the man in charge of all the chickens is our host. Now, he's been working there 28 years. He owns practically nothing. If he takes us into his apartment, you'll see a little, very modest divan, a bookcase with a dozen books in it. It's tidy, it's clean. It's all he owns. 28 years. If he left tomorrow, they'd give him a suit, maybe a couple $100, send him on his way. That'd be the end. Meanwhile, they provide his medicine, his food, and his clothing. But he has to take the regulation clothing. Couldn't buy any of his own. They started to give out money for, and you make your own furniture. And they give out money and you make your own clothes. And you know what happened? Some of those women came out mighty fancy. And immediately we got jealousy and hard feelings. And they try to keep a common denominator of mediocrity, really is what it is. Now, I wanted you to see one of these because they're like the Hutterites. Beautiful farm. Everything's beautiful, but the lives of the people. And they are just enslaved to a system to keep it going. Now, if you don't have any aspirations to leave it, and if you are conditioned mentally to accept it, you can get along pretty good. They have committees that make the work assignments. Everything's done on kind of a democratic basis and so forth. And the farm will really prosper. But one of the best educations you can get on the law of consecration will be today. And you'll see all the advantages of the Lord's program in contrast to the disadvantages of the other one. If you're insightful, if you know what you're looking at. A lot of people go down and say, well, no doubt about it, this is the way to live, man. Look at this nice oh, man, they have their schools, everything's set up. But as the man told me up in Canada, a Hutterite colony, something is missing. Don't know exactly what, but something is missing. Now, let me just share something now in closing that's of a personal nature. A number of years ago, we reached a stage where we were comfortable and out of debt, home paid for, enough security to kind of help our children all go through their missions and so forth. And about that time, President McKay said, I'm so frustrated. I'm trying to get the priesthood to get involved in saving freedom in the earth. That's part of the gospel program, and I have somebody talk on it, or I talk on it every conference. I've done it for 10 years. I'm not getting any response. And I want some of you priesthood to start it. And Brother Skousen, you're going back down to BYU. You told me you're willing to go back down there again. Now, why don't you start something? And that's when... that was a shock. I just told him I would be glad to go back to BYU if he wanted me to, and he said, I would like to have you do that. I just said I would do that. Now he says, we ought to start some of these programs teaching people how to preserve freedom. He said, we're not teaching the Constitution. We're teaching something else. And he said, the Lord's not pleased with it, and this generation is not being prepared for the great crisis that's coming for it. And it's not going to have the answers. And the world is going to turn to them for answers, and they're not going to be prepared, and I'm worried about it. So when you get down there, why don't you start something? It was just a suggestion. It wasn't a mission call, but I took it seriously. I said, well, President, I think if the church really got behind a program like that, and BYU wrote the curriculum, I think it would really go. No, he said, the church must have nothing to do with it. That would limit its influence. And BYU must have nothing to do with it. This must be independent. It must be for all faiths and all parties, and it just must be fundamental in its approach for freedom and the Constitution, not only for our country, but for the world. And I said, well, president of the church didn't have anything to do with it. We wouldn't have any machinery to work through. Well, he said, that's right, you'd have to build some. I said, boy, that'd take a lot of money. He said, yes, you'd have to raise some money. I said, President, have you got any suggestions? And he said, yes, just start. And the way will be opened up. Well, that was 1967. And I got to thinking about this stewardship principle. Why not treat something like this as a little stewardship? Other people could do the same thing, but for ourselves, we try a little stewardship. What would we do first of all? Well, prepare ourselves. So I started reading all the Founding Fathers' writings. What amazed me was, here I'm a political scientist and a lawyer, I was never taught this. I suddenly discovered the answers for every major problem facing America today in their writings, repeated over and over again. Nobody ever told me the Founding Fathers' formula for a great nation. I'd been taught Supreme Court decisions. That's how I passed the bar the first time round. So I got excited. By 1971, we had put it together in a little package and we were beginning to teach it. Our problem was money. So in our family, we decided to kind of treat this as stewardship. So we cut our income in two, and we put half of it, we rented a little building, got a telephone, got a part-time secretary, and we had enough money to subsidize it and keep it going and get it started. And live on the other half and so forth. And my family were just wonderful, and they cut back and sacrificed. My sweet wife supported me in that project till we kind of get it going. Then some people would come along and say, we're too busy to teach or anything, but can we help? And I said, you bet. If you'll just help me enough so I can get an assistant, that'll be fine. And so we began to become an organization. Pretty soon I said, now we need a board. And when the board came on, we started picking them out. Most of them had been our major contributors. I said, now I'd like to set this up so that neither you nor I ever receive anything by way of compensation. We have our living from other means. Is that agreeable? Yes. Fine. And that's the way we've kept it. And everything we've done since then, we've worked hard every way that we could to make money to give away. That is to put in stewardship projects. Make as much money as you can. Put in stewardship projects. Same thing with our Holy Land tours. All the proceeds go right into the freedom fight. Anything that we make. Sometimes we make a little, sometimes we don't. Depends on the circumstances. But if we do, none of it comes to me. You know, have you gone around these shops and had them say, well, boy, your tour group is getting a kickback, etc. We get nothing from these shops. And so I just wanted to show you how much fun we've been having. Because everything that we make over and above what we absolutely need for our living, which is taken care of by other means as a result of investments and things we did when we were younger and so forth. We have the fun of doing something you always wanted to do without it being anything other than just a stewardship. And the Lord has really blessed us. And doors are opening up for us now so fast that resources is all that's holding us back. We are now going international, almost before we've gone national in our own country, when we are coast to coast in 47 states. But now countries are knocking at the door and saying, what about this model constitution, which is almost ready for publication? It's about 80% done. That's all Brother Melchin's fault over there. He got me involved in the Freeman Institute of Canada and said we got to write up a constitution for Canada. And it turned out to be a model constitution for any country. And he gave me a strange instruction, he and his associates. He said, write it up, but don't have it look like anything like the American Constitution. And that's where the Lord said all the correct principles were. So I studied it, and I saw that it was the same thing that's in Mosiah 29. So the form of the structure isn't important, just the principles. So we changed the form. And it could be changed even more, as long as those principles are there. And in our book, The 5,000-Year Leap, we've set down the 28 basic principles that have got to be in an ideal system of free government. Now, all that's been the result of President McKay's beautiful suggestion that we at least try to do something. Now, you've got stewardships. We just decided our cars are modest cars. We keep our home nice and so forth. But we didn't go for the any more expenditure on the home and fancy things. And I like beautiful things too. And I admire some people who spend a lot of money to have certain things beautiful. I don't. They know what they want to do in life. What I want to do is to see the freedom spirit spread across the earth in terms of the Lord's principles. Now, when the Founding Fathers were through in 1787, they didn't know it, but God was going to say in the 98th section of the Doctrine and Covenants, they hit the center, the balanced center of the political spectrum. And anything that is more or less than this is evil. Boy, what a compliment to a group of planners. Took them 4 months. They thought they were going to do it in 3 weeks. But when they finally hit it, anything that's more or less than this is evil. So I don't make any apologies to politicians or anything when they'll say, but Dr. Skousen, that's not practical. I say, no, but it's right. And you got to make it practical. And that's what Joseph Smith said. Find the correct principle and then make it popular. So that's what we're trying to do. And already some of them are being adopted. I'm so amazed. We've gone ahead in a very puritanical way and said whatever the founders said was right, they thought was right, the Lord has endorsed. Things that they had consensus on. And by the way, they had consensus on eliminating slavery. A lot of people don't know that. They just had to postpone it 20 years, and then the South didn't respond to the instructions and got a civil war out of it. But the founders would have been among the first to do away with slavery. In that very year, they had outlawed slavery in the Northwest Ordinance in the Congress. A lot of people don't quite appreciate that, because in the Constitution it postponed the federal government dealing with slavery for 20 years. That was to give the South a chance to phase it out. But anyway, they were brilliant, beautiful spirits. So we've kind of treated that as our stewardship. To put any money that we can have, acquire and so forth, into that great program. Well, brothers and sisters, there's the stewardship principle. There's the law of consecration. I guess I'll close now because the time is running out on us by just simply saying this, that what Brother Dyer had in mind was that we're not too far away where there are saints who would be going about their daily business, teaching in school, farming, running steel mills without anybody knowing they were part of an order of consecration. That everything they were making over and above their living was in the order. That order was set up to take care of that man's children as they came up and needed their stewardship, of his medical expenses. In other words, he just doesn't worry about property. All of those people are putting their funds into a very quiet program that has evolved. And you would meet them on the street and never know that they're part of an order of consecration. Now, what Brother Dyer was saying, we're beginning to get Latter-day Saints that are up on that high enough level, who won't worry too much about the 20 acres. You see what I mean? I mean, you've got to have in your heart a great confidence in your bishop and in the order. You've got to put down things that gnaw at you, and you say, oh, I don't think that's quite fair. I think the bishop's favoring. You've got to get that out of your system, or we would never enjoy living the law of consecration. And the money that's in our possession, the property that's in our possession, the children that are in our possession are all part of stewardship. And each one of us has to say, what are you doing with your stewardship? Hoarding it or making it productive for a good cause? Now it'd be nice, I think, if we had our morning prayer, and then we'll get on the bus And I think in the light of what we've been talking about this morning, you're going to find this a very interesting experience as we go down to the biggest and one of the most successful of all the kibbutzim in all Israel.